Hi guys, and welcome to Last Light Radio channel. Tonight we slip out of the last dry corner of town and into a world where the road ahead is nothing but wet earth, low clouds, and the long, uneasy promise of Oregon. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to crawl into a canvas tent in 1845 knowing the rain may not stop until morning, or the next morning, or the one after that? You can almost hear it already. The soft hiss on wagon covers, the muttering oxen, the crackle of a campfire trying not to die. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and while you are here, comment your location and local time. Now, dim the lights, and let yourself step into the damp evening of a frontier departure, where every smell seems sharper in the rain, and every comfort suddenly feels rich enough to be royal. You stand near the muddy edge of Independence, Missouri. In the spring of 1845, with a wagon train making its slow, awkward preparations for the journey west. The town behind you still carries the scent of fresh bread, horse sweat, pipe smoke, and damp timber. Head. The road waits in a long brown ribbon, already softening under a steady drizzle. You can feel the wetness in the air before a single drop touches your face. It clings to your sleeves, it settles in your hair, it makes every wool layer feel heavier by the minute. Around you, people perform the strange theatre of departure. Wheels are checked, or axles are greased, buckles are tightened, flour sacks are shifted to keep them away from leaks. Someone calls for a missing tin cup as if it were a lost jewel. Someone else argues over bacon. This is how grand migrations really begin. Not with trumpets, but with muttered counting and damp rope. The wagon beside yours groans under its load. Contrary to the tidy pictures people sometimes imagine, it is not a heroic mountain of furniture and cheerful optimism. It is packed with plain necessity: barrels, bedding, tools, seed, ironware, clothing, spare harness, and food for months. The emigrant road has no patience for decoration. Historians generally agree that overloading a wagon was one of the most common mistakes on the trail, because every extra pound asked the animals to drag one more little bad decision across 2,000 miles of ground. You look at the pile of possessions and realize that comfort has been reduced to weight and argument. Rain taps softly on the wagon cover. The canvas smells raw and earthy, mixed with linseed oil, old dust, and animal musk. Nearby, an ox flicks its ears and exhales a slow, damp breath that hangs like steam in the cooling air. You place a hand against the wagon wheel. The wood is slick. The iron rim feels cold as riverstone. There is a tent rolled and tied among your things, and it does not look impressive. It is simple canvas, pale and practical, with cords, pegs, and a promise that feels modest at best. No one in camp treats it as a magical shield against the weather. It is more like a negotiation with nature, and nature is already smirking. You leave the busier stretch of town and follow the train toward open country, where the road begins to widen into trampled grass and churned mud. The sounds change as you go. Hammering fades. Birdsong disappears under the rain. Wagon wheels make a slow sucking sound in the soil. Harness chains clink with sleepy regularity. Somewhere behind you a child cries, then stops. Perhaps from fatigue, perhaps from resignation, perhaps because even children understand when the sky has settled into one of its long moods. The light grows dimmer, though it is not yet late. Thick clouds spread across the prairie in one unbroken layer, turning the whole evening silver grey. The horizon seems farther and closer at once. There are no walls here, no chimneys, no deep porches, no dry corners to steal, just grass, mud, wagons, and sky. A person can feel very small under such weather, also very washable, which is less romantic. When the call goes up to make camp, people move with a quiet urgency. You learn quickly that stopping for the night is not restful. It is labour performed while tired. The wagons are brought into position. Animals are tended first, because a hungry ox does not care about your bedtime. Yokes are handled, feed is considered, hooves are checked. Men and women alike bend into the work, skirts darkening with the rain at the hem, boots sinking, shoulders glistening under damp shawls and coats. You help unroll the tent. The canvas feels rough against your fingers, stiff in some places, soft in others where use has worn it. Rain beads along the folds, then runs off in cold little streams that sneak into your cuffs. The ground chosen for the tent is less a dry patch than a spot that seems only slightly less committed to becoming a pond. Stakes are driven with dull thuds. Ropes are pulled tight. The tent rises in a plain sloping shape. Not grand, not roomy, but deeply welcome. Inside, the air smells of cloth, wet soil, and the faint ghost of old smoke. You set down bedding that must be protected like treasure. Blankets are everything out here. A dry blanket is health, sanity, and a small piece of civilization. A wet blanket is an insult made of wool. You spread what you can over oilcloth and whatever barrier lies between you and the ground. Though the earth still sends up its chill through every layer, when you kneel, your knees press into softness that is not softness at all, just mud thinking polite thoughts. Outside, the campfire is being coaxed into life. It should not be possible. Everything looks soaked. Yet people on the Oregon Trail learned the art of finding a little dry heart inside wet wood, splitting pieces open, shaving curls, protecting flame with hands and bodies and pure stubbornness. A small orange glow appears, then a wavering flame, then a reluctant crackle. Smoke rises low and thick, carrying the sharp smell of green wood, grease, and effort. It stings your nose, it clings to your clothes. It feels wonderful. You crouch near the fire and warm your hands over heat that comes and goes with the wind. A kettle is set on. Bacon sputters somewhere in the gloom. Coffee, or something aspiring to be coffee, begins to send up a bitter, comforting smell. The rain does not stop for any of this. It falls on hats, shawls, wagon bows, animal backs, and bent shoulders with the same steady indifference. But the campfire makes a small circle of rebellion. Faces around the fire shine in flickering light. They are tired already, though the journey has scarcely begun. That is one of the quiet truths of overland travel. The trail does not wait to wear you down gradually. Like a considerate villain, it begins at once. Mud on the first evening, wet bedding as a threat, chores in the rain, supper fought from smoke. There you are, only a little distance from town, and already the world feels rearranged. Someone mentions the miles ahead in a tone that tries to sound casual and fails. Another person jokes that at least rain keeps the dust down. This earns a few laughs, because frontier humour often survives by setting the bar on the ground and stepping over it. You take your portion of supper, simple and hot enough to matter. The tin cup warms your fingers. Bacon tastes smoky and salty. Coffee tastes like a burnt idea, but a useful one. Hunger improves nearly everything. A curious fact drifts around camp with the smoke. Some emigrants believed coffee was practically medicinal on the trail, not just a drink, but a defense against cold mornings, bad moods, and human weakness in general. It may not cure anything except optimism loss, but tonight it seems nearly holy. You sip slowly while rain hisses at the edge of the firelight. In the darkness beyond camp, the prairie settles into low sounds. Oxen shift their weight with wet, leathery creaks. A mule stamps. Wagon covers snap softly when the wind catches them. Water drips from wheel spokes and tent lines with irritating persistence. Every object appears to be leaking, breathing, or complaining. The land itself feels alive in a patient, unsentimental way. You duck back inside the tent when the chill begins to creep through your clothes. Entering is an awkward little dance. You stoop, push aside the flap, and bring with you the smell of smoke and rain. Inside, the dimness is close and private. Every movement makes the canvas rustle. Drops patter overhead in a dense, steady rhythm, sometimes soft, sometimes suddenly harder when a breeze changes the angle of the rain. You lie down carefully, aware that one careless elbow may nudge bedding toward a damp seam or an unkind patch of ground. The fabric above your face glows faintly with whatever light the clouds still allow. You can hear voices outside, blurred now, mixed with the rain. One wagon tongue knocks lightly against wood. Someone coughs. A baby lets out a brief protest, then quiets. There is something intimate about these sounds. You're among strangers and yet not alone. Everyone in camp is listening to the same weather, measuring the same dark, hoping the same canvas will hold. Scholars still disagree on how often emigrants actually slept in separate tents rather than under wagons, inside wagons, or in the open when conditions allowed. Practice is varied by family size, weather, wealth, and personal habit. But on a wet night like this, with the ground turning mean and the sky unwilling to show mercy, a tent feels like a deeply sensible friend. Not a luxurious friend, more the kind who offers one dry corner and does not ask questions. You pull a blanket to your chin, the wool scratches your skin but the roughness is reassuring. Your boots sit nearby, dark with mud, looking exhausted. The hem of your garment is still damp, your fingers smell faintly of bacon grease, smoke, wet rope, and earth. Those smells might offend a parlour back east. Out here they smell like success. Small success. Yes. But on the trail, small success is the common currency of survival. The rain deepens in sound. It is no longer tapping. It is drumming. The tent cloth trembles slightly at each stronger gust. Somewhere water begins to gather and slide down one side in a soft, heavy sheet. You place a hand against the bedding to check for seepage. Still dry enough. That is the sort of victory you learn to celebrate without applause. As you lie there, your thoughts drift toward the reason people accept such misery in the first place. Oregon has become, for many Americans, a place of almost mythical promise. Rich soil, new chances, space enough to remake a life. Some of that promise was real. The Willamette Valley did attract settlers with its farming potential, and word of fertile land spread eagerly through letters, newspapers, and campfire talk. Yet much of the westward dream arrived wrapped in exaggeration, half-understood geography, and a heroic amount of selective hearing. People heard what hope wanted them to hear. There are also stranger stories, the sort that survive because the trail collected rumours as easily as mud. One traveller swore that certain campsites were always cursed with rain because someone had once buried a broken mirror there. Another insisted that prairie wolves laughed just before a storm. Sleep-deprived people in wet clothes can make poetry out of nonsense, and perhaps that is its own frontier skill. You turn onto one side and listen. The rain on canvas begins to sort itself into patterns, quick beats, long slides, tiny bursts where drops strike a taut line, a softer tapping where runoff reaches the flap. It becomes almost musical, if you're tired enough, which you absolutely are. The campfire outside has weakened to a faint smell. Voices fade one by one. The animals grow quieter. The whole camp seems to draw inward. Cold still presses up from the ground, but the blanket traps a pocket of warmth around your chest and shoulders. Your eyes grow heavy. The last thing you notice clearly is the contrast between the wide, wild prairie outside and this small shelter around you, stitched by human hands, smelling of weather, holding back the dark by the thinnest practical margin. It is not luxury. It is not certainty. It is enough. And on the Oregon Trail, enough can feel almost grand. Morning does not arrive with sunlight. It arrives as a dim grey thinning of the dark, a slow reveal of canvas walls beaded with moisture, and a steady sound that never truly stopped. Rain still falls over the prairie with patient determination, as though the sky has chosen one task and sees no reason to vary its routine. You open your eyes to the smell of damp wool, cold soil, and the faint sourness of clothes that dried halfway and then gave up. The air inside the tent feels close and chilly at once. When you breathe out, your own warmth seems briefly visible in the gloom. For a few seconds you lie still, listening. Water ticks from the tent line. A wagon wheel nearby gives a creaking complaint as somebody shifts its load. An ox snorts, followed by the squelch of hooves in mud. Someone outside says good morning in the same tone a person might use for bad news delivered politely. This is your first full waking moment in a trail camp under endless rain, and it has all the romance of a wet sock. You sit up carefully, the blanket slides from your shoulders, and the cold bites at once. Your hand reaches down to test the bedding underneath. Still mostly dry, though the edges feel clammy. That is how comfort shrinks out here. Not dry. Mostly dry. Not warm. Less cold. Not rested. Able to stand. Standards have become frontier-sized overnight. The tent flap lifts, and the morning air slips in like a thief. Smells of trampled grass, smoke from a fire that struggled hard for its existence, and the rich mineral scent of churned earth. You pull on boots that are stiffer than they were yesterday, and colder than you think boots have any right to be. The leather grips your damp stockings with a miserable intimacy. Then you duck outside. The camp has changed shape. What looked like a patch of open ground by evening has become a world of slick brown channels, puddles with uncertain depth, and narrow ridges of grass people use as tiny roads to preserve the illusion of dignity. Wagons stand in place like damp hulks, their covers darkened by water, their wheels sunk deep enough to suggest the prairie might prefer to keep them, smoke trails low from a few cooking fires, bending under the wet air and clinging close to the ground. Everything appears smudged at the edges. A woman near one wagon is wringing out a cloth with fierce concentration, as if she can squeeze the weather itself into submission. Two boys attempt to carry a bucket without sloshing mud into it, a task that quickly proves theoretical. A man kneels by a wheel hub, applying grease with fingers so muddy the distinction feels symbolic. This is not the stirring freshness of morning in a painted landscape. This is the whole camp waking into another round of damp negotiations. Breakfast must happen, because hunger cares little about aesthetics. You crouch beside a fire pit where a few determined souls are engaged in what seems less like cooking, and more like strategic flame management. The wood pops and hisses. Every time the fire begins to catch, a little gust of misting rain sweeps through and asks whether anyone here is feeling too confident. Someone holds a skillet at an angle over the coals. Someone else feeds in split pieces from the dry centre of a log saved for the purpose. The smell is sharp and wonderful. Wet ash, coffee, grease, survival. You warm your hands over the stingy heat. They ache as circulation returns. A pins and needles reminder that your body has spent the night defending itself against cold ground and thin shelter. The first sip from a hot tin cup feels almost startling. Bitterness, heat, and a little grit settle onto your tongue. Perfect, or close enough that nobody intends to complain loudly. The food is plain, but plain food in rain gains a kind of grandeur. A strip of bacon, a biscuit if fortune smiles. Perhaps mush, perhaps beans, perhaps hope disguised as coffee. Flour on the trail often had to be guarded like treasure, since damp sacks could clump, sour, or attract trouble in smaller crawling forms. Some emigrants packed barrels of hard bread or crackers to survive stretches when proper baking failed, though many of those items became blunt instruments of endurance rather than pleasure. You chew slowly, aware of warmth spreading through your chest. The rain keeps its own rhythm above the camp. Not heavy enough to force panic, not light enough to ignore, just steady, soaking, relentless. It beads on hats and shawls, drips from wagon bows, gathers at the corners of canvas, and slides down ropes in cold silver threads. When you lift your face, the drops touch your skin with the same indifferent chill as before. They seem almost personal by now. Chores begin immediately after eating, because camp life is stitched together by necessity rather than preference. Bedding must be aired if there is any chance at all. Wet garments must be rearranged. Cooking things cleaned, animals checked, harness inspected. A loose strap today can become a major trouble tomorrow, and trouble on the trail rarely waits its turn. You carry items from tent to wagon and back again, stepping carefully where the ground feels least treacherous. Mud grips at your boots with each step, making a soft sucking sound that grows ridiculous through repetition. You begin to understand how a person could hate soil. The animals wear the weather with a dull, weary patience. Oxen stand broad and wet, their hides slick, their breaths coming slow and visible in the cool air. They smell of musk, mud, and warm hide. A heavy, honest smell that does not pretend to be pleasant. A mule tosses its head and jingles harness metal with impatient annoyance. Horses, where present, look cleaner in stories than in camp. Here they are streaked, damp, and thoroughly unconvinced by the romance of westward destiny. You reach to stroke an ox along the neck. The hide is coarse and warm beneath the wetness, and the animal barely acknowledges your existence. Fair enough. It is carrying more of the dream than you are. There is talk around camp of moving later if the rain weakens. Nobody seems certain. The trail under wet conditions becomes a question of timing, muscle, and luck. Too early, and the wagons mire down. Too late, and precious miles vanish. On the Oregon Trail, time was measured not just by days, but by grass for animals, river levels, wheel condition, and weather moods. A bad delay in one place could ripple outward in ways nobody liked to name aloud. You help retighten one corner of the tent where the rope has loosened in the wet. The canvas gives slightly under your hand, rough and cool, smelling of soaked cloth and old dust. Water has left dark streaks across it. You can see where droplets collect at the seam before finally letting go. The whole thing looks tired, though perhaps you are assigning human feelings to a shelter because you need the companionship. Historians still debate how accurate many emigrant recollections were when written years later, especially regarding weather and hardship. Memory has a talent for drama. Rain becomes more endless, mud more heroic, biscuits more tragic. Yet even allowing for exaggeration, the practical misery of prolonged wet conditions appears again and again in diaries and letters from westward migrants. Reading such accounts, you get the impression that moisture was an active enemy with excellent strategy. A child near the next wagon discovers this firsthand by losing one shoe in the mud up to the ankle. Recovery becomes a group event. 2 adults laugh, 1 adult sighs, and the child looks betrayed by the continent. Frontier childhood offered many educational moments. Some of them involve being partially swallowed by the ground. By late morning, the camp settles into a strange rhythm, neither fully moving nor properly resting. Some people sit under wagon covers mending clothing or checking supplies. Others scrape mud from tools with bits of wood. A woman stirs a pot and stares into the distance with the blank expression of someone conserving emotion for emergencies. Somewhere a fiddle is briefly tuned, then sensibly put away before moisture can ruin it. Music exists on the trail, but rain is often the louder performer. You find shelter for a moment beneath the wagon cover and look out at the camp through the hanging edge of canvas. From there, the world seems framed in strips of dripping cloth and crooked poles. The ground beyond looks slick as tallow. Puddles shiver with each drop. Smoke moves in blue-grey veils. People pass in blurred shapes, their hats low, their shoulders rounded, their steps measured. A person could almost drift asleep watching it, were it not for the constant need to do something useful. There is always one more useful thing. A flour sack needs shifting away from damp wood. Tin plates need wiping. A blanket needs shaking. The axle wrench has gone missing and must be located before someone blames the wrong family. Domestic life has not vanished on the prairie. It has simply become muddier, louder, and much less forgiving. One curious trail belief comes up while you work. Some emigrants insisted that placing boots upside down at the tent entrance helped keep scorpions, spiders, or other unwelcome visitors from settling in. Whether this worked, no one can say with conviction. On a rain-soaked stretch of prairie, the superstition seems harmless enough. You notice several pairs arranged precisely that way anyway. It may not stop any creature at all, but it gives people the comforting sense that they have outwitted at least one problem. By noon, the campfire smoke has settled into your clothes so completely that you no longer notice it until the wind shifts and presents it afresh. Your sleeves smell of ash. Your hair smells faintly singed at the ends. Your hands carry traces of grease, damp rope, and iron. Nothing about you belongs to indoor life at the moment. Even your skin feels weathered, cooled by mist and roughened by labour. Yet there is an odd steadiness growing inside you. Fatigue, yes. Discomfort, certainly, but also adaptation. Human beings are annoyingly resilient when given no elegant alternative. The decision is made not to push on. The ground is too soft, the rain too persistent, the risk to wagons too plain. There is no grand announcement, just a quiet spread of understanding through the camp, like another form of weather. Some people take the news with relief, others with impatience, a few with the blank stare reserved for events beyond personal control. Staying put means another wet day, another wet evening, another attempt to preserve spirits without wasting supplies. So the second half of the day turns inward. More careful work, more waiting, more protecting what can be protected. You help lay out a few items beneath the wagon whenever a brief thinning of rain offers hope, then snatch them back when droplets strengthen again. The tent receives another inspection. One seam shows a darker line where moisture is threatening to pass through. A bit of waxed cloth is adjusted over the spot. It is not beautiful craftsmanship. It is defensive architecture. Afternoon drains toward evening with remarkable slowness. Grey remains grey. The prairie beyond camp fades into a soft blur where grass meets low cloud. Sound carries oddly in such weather. A cough from across camp seems close. The rattle of a chain carries clear and metallic. The rain itself fills every pause, making silence impossible but somehow gentle. It is not a harsh storm, it is a complete one. Supper preparation begins early because tasks take longer in damp air and bad footing. You gather near the fire again, grateful for heat even when smoke blows directly into your eyes. Tears come instantly, and for one absurd second it feels as if the weather has found a way to rain from inside your face as well. Someone mutters a joke about smoked eyelids. It is not especially witty. Everyone appreciates it anyway. The meal is simple, hot, and eaten with focus. There is little energy for chatter now. Bodies have spent the day balancing, lifting, stooping, shivering, and enduring. The warmth of food enters you slowly, spreading to places the fire could not reach. Around the wagons, the animals shift and breathe. Leather creaks, water drips from spokes and hubs. The fire pops once, bright and stubborn. When darkness arrives, it does so gently. The clouds simply lower their curtain a little more. Lamps glow here and there, yellow against the blue-grey dusk, then vanish as tent flaps close and wagon covers are pulled tight. You step back into the tent with care, carrying in a little heat from the fire and a great deal of dampness from everything else. The bedding feels cooler than you hoped, though still dry enough to count as fortune. You settle down slowly, listening as the camp quiets. Rain continues its patient conversation with the canvas roof. Outside, a wagon settles with a long wooden sigh. A mule stamps once, then again. Farther off, someone clears a throat and murmurs a final word you cannot quite catch. The smell inside the tent is stronger tonight. Wet cloth, earth, wool, smoke, and the faint metallic scent of rain itself. Your body feels heavy now, worked into stillness. The ground remains hard, the air remains cold. Yet the tent encloses a small patch of order in a soaked and sprawling world. You pull the blanket higher and let the rhythm overhead blur your thoughts. The rain does not care whether you sleep. Still, after a day like this, sleep comes anyway. By the third wet evening, the tent has become less a shelter than a personality in your life. You know its moods now. You know which flap sticks when the cord swells with moisture. You know which corner sags first when the ground softens beneath a peg. You know the exact sound of a harmless patter and the darker, heavier sound that means water has started to gather somewhere overhead. You lie inside at dusk and listen to the canvas breathing with the weather, rising and settling in small motions, as though the whole structure is trying very hard not to complain. Outside, the camp fades into a blur of grey and brown once again. Daylight never truly brightened, so evening feels less like an ending and more like a deepening of the same long, damp thought. The smell in the tent has changed over time. It is no longer just clean cloth made wet. Now it carries layers, damp canvas, mud tracked in on boots, wool blankets that have absorbed smoke and breath, a little bacon grease from fingers not fully washed, a faint sourness from clothing that has dried in patches, then gone wet again. You would not bottle this scent for polite company, but it has become the smell of your temporary world. You sit cross-legged on the bedding and inspect the roof by lamplight. The light is low and trembling, turning every seam into a line of shadow and shine. Tiny droplets gather in some places, hanging for long seconds before dropping without warning. You have learned to read the shape of trouble. A darkened stitch line means watch it. A bulge in the cloth means move your blanket. A cold touch on the back of your hand means the sky has just found a new route indoors. You shift a folded cloth beneath one drip point and then another. The gesture feels almost ceremonial by now. Defending dryness is a nightly occupation. Your blanket must stay clear of the wall, because canvas pressed from the inside invites dampness through. Your boots must sit where runoff cannot reach them. The small bag with personal items has to remain elevated, because the ground itself has become untrustworthy. It is remarkable how many plans are made in life around avoiding puddles. Rain strikes harder for a while, and the whole tent changes voice. What was once 1,000 gentle taps becomes a rapid drumming above your head, dense and insistent. The ropes tighten with the weight of wet cloth. The side nearest the wind quivers in short bursts. A peg gives a tiny creak in the soil. You feel your shoulders lift before you realize you're bracing. A tent teaches humility very efficiently. Brick walls encourage opinions. Canvas encourages gratitude. You crawl toward the entrance and lift the flap by an inch to look outside. The world beyond appears in fragments. A wagon wheel half sunk in mud. Firelight moving weakly under a makeshift cover. The shadow of an ox, broad and still, with rain sliding off its back in silver lines. Then a gust blows droplets into your face, cold and sharp, and you let the flap fall closed again. So much for curiosity. The air inside feels warmer once it is shut, though not truly warm. Your fingertips are chilled. Your knees ache from kneeling on hard ground through the day. There is a deep tiredness in your muscles that no single task can explain. It comes from dozens of small acts done in wet clothes and uncertain footing, carrying water, tightening rope, shifting supplies, keeping a fire alive, scraping mud from tools, getting up each time something begins to leak. This is how exhaustion works on the trail. Not as one dramatic blow, but as an endless collection of inconveniences that join hands. You settle back down and listen to the camp through the canvas. Sound reaches you softened, as if wrapped in wool. A pan clatters somewhere outside and draws a muffled groan from its owner. A child laughs once, unexpectedly bright, then is hushed. A team animal shakes itself, producing the heavy wet shudder of hide and harness. From farther off comes the faintest thread of singing, not strong enough to make out words, only enough to suggest that someone is trying to keep spirits from sinking entirely into the mud. The weather gives you plenty of time to notice details that fair skies might erase. The touch of the blanket against your chin is rough, but welcome. The underside of the canvas feels cool when your knuckles brush it. Straw or grass tucked beneath part of the bedding has flattened into a faint, scratchy layer that offers little comfort but stubbornly claims to help. Even the lamp has a smell, a warm, oily note mixing with wet cloth and smoke. Everything sensory becomes sharper when life has narrowed to shelter, food, and endurance. Some emigrants tried to make their tents more weather-resistant with extra coatings, wax treatments, or careful rubbing of seams, though results surely varied. Canvas in this period could be strong, but strong did not mean flawless. Water had patience, wind had creativity, and people, despite all effort, were still working with fabric and pegs against a sky the size of a continent. You run your fingers along one stitched line and wonder how many similar seams have been trusted with human sleep. Historians still argue over how much popular imagery of westward migration has been softened by later nostalgia. In paintings and public memory, you often get the glow of campfires, the sturdy wagons, the brave forward motion. Much less attention lands on the clammy middle hours, when a person sits under drooping canvas and tries to decide whether that cold spot on the blanket is actual seepage or merely dread. Yet those small, uncomfortable moments were likely among the most common experiences on the trail. A gust presses the tent wall inward, just enough to brush your shoulder. The contact is startlingly intimate. For a second it feels as though the storm itself has leaned in to check on you. Then the wall springs back and the rain resumes its steady hammering. You give a dry little laugh to no one. Life has become strange enough that you're being jostled by architecture. You lean over to adjust the bedding again and discover a damp patch creeping at the edge. Not large, not disastrous, but real. You reach for a spare cloth and press it there, then pull the blanket farther toward the centre. Your hands move with care and speed, all practiced now. There is no room for theatrical despair over a little moisture. The frontier rewards action, not eloquent suffering, though a little eloquent suffering in private does no harm. Outside, supper has ended and the camp is quieter than earlier nights. Fatigue has worn down conversation. The people around you are no less present, yet they seem to have withdrawn into themselves. The sounds are household sounds reduced to their simplest forms. Coughing, low voices, a spoon striking a tin cup, a flap tied shut, a wagon board settling. The rain lays itself over everything like a second roof. You think about the objects in the tent with you. Their number is small, and everyone has purpose. Blanket, boots, bag, cup, a few garments, perhaps a Bible, perhaps a journal, perhaps some personal token tucked away where damp fingers seldom reach. Luxury has become deeply practical. A dry stocking feels luxurious. A cup that is not lost feels luxurious. A corner where nothing drips feels downright aristocratic. There were also odd little tricks travellers traded for sleeping better in wet camp. Some swore by heating a stone near the fire and wrapping it before placing it by the feet. Others stuffed extra grass under bedding whenever they could find some not already soaked. A few claimed that sleeping with your clothes loosened but not removed helped keep body heat from fleeing. Whether these methods worked brilliantly or merely gave people something to do, they offered a sense of control. On a rainy night, that may have been half the cure, you rub your hands together for warmth and tuck them beneath the blanket. The wool scratches, then settles. Your body slowly releases the tension held in your neck and shoulders. Not all of it. Never all of it. A part of you remains alert, listening for the changed rhythm that means a leak has become a drip, or a drip has become a problem. Sleep under canvas is rarely complete surrender. It is a bargain. You may rest, the weather says, but only lightly. The lamp flame trembles again. Shadows shift across the tent roof. For an instant, the seams above resemble lines on a map, roads crossing a country you have not yet seen. Then the shape changes and it is only wet cloth once more. Tiredness invites such fancies. You're not delirious, only trail-tired, which is its own category of thought. Things become symbolic very easily when you're cold. The rain eases a little. You can hear it happen. The hard drumming softens into separate strokes, then finer tapping, then the gentle hiss of a runoff slipping from the roofline. With that change, other sounds grow clearer. Frogs or insects begin somewhere beyond the camp, testing the damp dark with tentative notes. A mule crops at something unseen. Two people murmur nearby in the low, blurred tones of those who are too tired to argue and too awake to sleep. You do not catch the words, only the human need behind them. You stretch one leg carefully and feel the cramp ease from your calf. Your back reminds you that the ground is still the ground, no matter how many layers lie between. Yet there is a curious coziness in the confinement. The tent is small enough that you can reach nearly everything without standing. The low roof makes the little pool of lamplight feel sheltered. Outside is open prairie and weather without mercy. Inside is a pocket of order held together by rope, habit, and stubbornness. A scholarly uncertainty hangs over even the simplest details of trail life. Diaries survive unevenly. Letters were often revised by memory. Men wrote some things differently from women. Children, when they left accounts at all, noticed entirely other worlds. So when you picture one wet evening on the Oregon Trail, you're really holding many evenings at once, overlapping like translucent cloth. Still, certain truths push through every version. The labour was real, the discomfort was ordinary, and the emotional life of a camp could shift with the condition of a seam or the direction of wind. The lamp is finally pinched low. Darkness fills the tent without ceremony. Only a faint greyness remains where the flap does not quite meet the ground. In the dark, touch and sound take over completely. Your blanket feels heavier. The earth beneath seems more present. Rain resumes a slightly stronger beat, and each drop above you sounds closer than before. It is almost impossible not to imagine the whole sky resting directly on the canvas. Pressing down in a patient, watery weight, you lie on your back and let the noises sort themselves. Drip near the entrance, tap on the taut ridgeline, rustle of canvas when the breeze shifts, a heavier slide where collected water finally spills away. Somewhere outside, a horse stamps twice, then stillness, then rain again. The pattern grows hypnotic, though never quite gentle enough to forget. This is not a lullaby composed for comfort. It is simply weather doing what weather does, and your tired mind borrowing rhythm from it. Your body gives in a little more. Boots wait by the bedding for tomorrow's mud. Clothes hang or lie in damp silence. The tent, though imperfect, continues to hold. No new leaks appear, no peg pulls free. The little shelter survives another evening of pressure from sky and ground. You begin to understand why people on the trail spoke of gear almost as if it possessed character. Under conditions like these, reliability starts to feel like virtue. The last thought that passes through your mind is not grand. It is not a vision of Oregon or destiny or national expansion or fertile valleys waiting beyond mountains. It is a smaller and more immediate wish. Let the cloth hold until morning. Out here, that is enough of a dream to fall asleep with. The fire tonight begins as a rumour. You see the place where it ought to be before you see any flame at all. A dark hollow scraped into wet ground, ringed with stones blackened by use and rain. Around it gather the evening faces of the camp, drawn in by cold, hunger, and that ancient human wish to make light where none wants to stay. The air is raw on your cheeks. Dampness has slipped through every sensible layer of clothing. Your fingers feel wooden. Your boots have accepted mud as a permanent relationship. And now, in the thick grey close of day, the simple question of whether supper will be hot depends on a few reluctant sparks and the stubbornness of people who are too tired to fail. Someone kneels beside the pit with kindling cupped in both hands as if carrying a tiny animal. Thin curls of shaved wood lie protected beneath a scrap of canvas. A second person shields the space with bent shoulders. Another passes over a dry sliver split from the centre of a thicker stick. One of those treasured pieces saved carefully from the last decent chance to prepare. Nothing about this looks dramatic. It looks careful, almost fussy. The rain has trained everyone into precision. You crouch beside them and smell wet ash, cold earth, and the faint resin scent released when green wood is cut open. The whole campsite seems to lean toward this effort. Behind you, oxen breathe in slow grassy bursts. Harness rings click softly. Rain ticks off wagon covers and tent lines. Somewhere a pan is set down with more force than grace. But here, at the centre of this shrinking circle, all attention narrows to tinder, spark, and breath. The first flame appears so small it seems impolite to notice. It flickers in a nest of dry scrap, pale and uncertain, almost embarrassed by its own existence. Then a raindrop strikes nearby and everyone reacts at once. Hands shift, shoulders block. A hat brim lowers. One person murmurs something that sounds half prayer, half kitchen instruction. The little flame leans sideways, catches another shaving, and brightens. A thin ribbon of smoke curls up and blows directly into your face. Your eyes sting immediately. Tears come at once, warm and ridiculous. You turn your head and cough. The smoke smells sharp, green, almost bitter, with the acrid edge of wood not yet ready to burn but dragged into service anyway. It clings to your hair and sleeves. It settles in the back of your throat. And yet that miserable smoke carries wonderful news. Fire exists. More kindling goes on, carefully, never too much at once. That is one of the trail lessons you absorb quickly. A damp fire is like a suspicious animal. Crowd it, and it sulks. Rush it, and it dies. Feed it properly, and it will decide you are acceptable company. The flame licks up through thin sticks. It cracks. It hesitates. Then one small branch blackens, glows, and gives in. Orange spreads through the centre of the pile. Heat finally touches your knuckles, Weak, but unmistakable. Around the fire pit, people relax by the smallest degree. Not joy, not even comfort, just a slight unclenching. You can feel it in the way shoulders drop and breathing slows. Fire on a wet evening is not luxury. It is structure. It tells the night where camp begins. It gives the hands something to do. It makes supper possible. It suggests, however modestly, that human intention still counts for something on this soaked plain. You hold your palms out, turning them slowly to catch the warmth. The skin prickles as feeling returns. It almost hurts. The fronts of your fingers warm first, while the backs remain chilled by the damp air. Steam rises faintly from one cuff where rainwater gathered in the fold. The sensation is so small and so relieving that you understand why people in hard conditions become sentimental about coals. A kettle is brought forward and hung or balanced close enough to heat, far enough not to smother the flames. A skillet follows. Someone unwraps bacon. Someone else reaches for meal or flour with the anxious tenderness usually reserved for more glamorous valuables. The smell of grease soon joins the smoke, and the camp changes completely. A moment ago it was just wet and cold. Now it is wet, cold, and hopeful. The rain continues, though lighter than before. Fine drops drift across the edge of the firelight, turning briefly silver before vanishing. They hiss when they strike a coal. The sound is tiny but constant, a reminder that this warmth is contested from all sides. One person shifts a larger stick inward with a forked branch. Another turns a pot. Someone else fans the base of the fire with a scrap of board, slow and steady, coaxing rather than commanding. You watch all this and realize how much knowledge sits inside ordinary motions. No one here is making a speech about survival. They are simply doing what must be done, with the kind of competence that rarely appears in paintings. A campfire in rain is not romance, it is technique. Which wood was kept back? Which bark peels dry enough from the inside? How to stack fuel where airflow survives? How to bank coals for later? How to keep children and clumsy boots from knocking down the whole precious arrangement? Historians broadly agree that emigrants on the overland trails often relied on dried buffalo chips for fuel once wood grew scarce on certain stretches, especially farther west on the plains. The idea sounds unglamorous because it is, yet dried dung, properly cured by sun, burned usefully and became an accepted part of travel life. Here, with some wood still available and everything soaked, the conversation around the fire includes opinions on fuel quality delivered with the seriousness of legal testimony. One person praises split oak, another argues for twisted grass starters, a third claims nothing beats old chips kept under cover. Civilization may be many things, but it is also people debating combustion in bad weather. The quirky genius of camp life emerges in small tricks. One traveller keeps tinder in a tin tucked inside bedding to preserve its dryness. Another carries scraps of old charcloth as if they were precious letters. A woman produces a twist of paper saved from a goods wrapper and is regarded, briefly, as a magician. You begin to see that ingenuity on the trail is often just domestic thrift placed under pressure. The skillet starts to hiss in earnest. Bacon curls at the edges. Fat spits into the fire and sends up a fresh burst of smoke. The smell is rich, salty, irresistible. It cuts through wet air like a bell. Hunger sharpens at once. Around you, people lean a little closer, cups and plates ready. No banquet in a city dining room could feel more meaningful than this rough meal beginning over reluctant coals. You're handed a task because nobody lingers near a fire without earning the heat. Stir this, hold that, shift the pot, keep the cup from tipping. Work arrives in pieces, practical and immediate. You stir a thickening mixture that smells of cornmeal and steam. The spoon drags heavily through it. Your wrist aches. The heat from the pot warms your face while your back remains cold. This odd division of temperature feels deeply familiar now. On the trail, you're almost never warm all at once. The flames strengthen as darkness thickens. Faces emerge from shadow with orange light under the eyes and along the cheekbones, then disappear again when smoke drifts between. A few jokes pass around. dry as old leather, nothing elaborate. One man says the rain has improved his washing habits against his will. A woman replies that it has improved nobody's smell. That earns a tired laugh. Gentle sarcasm survives where luxury does not. A scholarly uncertainty lingers over the exact daily menus of many emigrant camps, because diaries often mention food without explaining quantities, substitutions, or the quiet disappointments between better meals. One writer might note coffee and bacon, another lists flour and beans, a third complains of monotonous fare without saying how it was prepared. The gap between a diary entry and the lived smell of supper is wide. Still, one thing comes through clearly. Hot food mattered beyond nutrition. It restored mood, rhythm, and a sense that the day had been properly met. You accept your portion in a tin vessel warm enough to sting your palms. Grease shines in the firelight. Steam curls upward and dampens your face. The first bite is almost embarrassingly good. Salt, smoke, heat, a little grit from trail life that no one bothers mentioning. Hunger makes every flavour larger. The cornmeal or biscuit feels dense and plain. The bacon tastes like triumph. The coffee tastes burnt and thin and wonderful. You sip, swallow, and feel your insides come back to life by slow degrees. Beyond the circle of light, the prairie has vanished into black wet distance. The rain blurs everything outside the fire's reach. Wagons stand as darker shapes against darkness. Animals shift and snort. A rope creaks. Water drips from axles and spokes in patient intervals. Yet around the fire there is a pocket of almost domestic order. Cooking, passing cups, checking on children, drying a glove too close to the heat and snatching it back with a muttered complaint. These are humble acts, but they preserve the feeling that life is still made of households, not just hardship. You edge closer once supper is done, extending boots toward the warmth. They will not dry tonight. That would be asking too much. But the leather softens slightly. Mud along the edges begins to crack and flake. You scrape at one sole with a stick and watch clumps drop away. Nearby, someone hangs a pair of stockings at a safe distance, then spends the next several minutes staring at them with suspicious devotion, as if wet fabric can be persuaded by sheer attention. The fire settles into a more confident burn. Coals glow red beneath the blackening wood. Every now and then a flame slips up through a gap and lights the underside of the kettle. The smell changes too. Less raw smoke now, more hot iron, grease, and that deep mineral scent of rain striking warm earth around the pit. It is a smell impossible to separate from evening itself. Some trail traditions around the fire were practical, others emotional. Stories got told. Songs surfaced when breath and spirits allowed. Recipes were compared, exaggerated, defended. People counted losses, planned miles, and pretended not to worry about rivers ahead. Tonight conversation remains light and low, perhaps because everyone is saving energy, perhaps because the weather has taught humility. A person remarks that the fire sounds friendlier than most relatives. Another says that is only because it cannot ask to borrow money. You smile into your cup and watch sparks lift briefly before rain swallows them. There is something deeply soothing in the small battle that no one expects to win forever. The rain will continue. The wood will burn down. Morning will bring fresh mud. Yet for this hour, warmth exists where there should have been none. Light trembles across hands made red by work. Supper sits in tired stomachs. Wet sleeves steam faintly at the wrists. The practical work does not end just because the meal is over. Coals must be managed for later use. Pots cleaned before grease hardens too badly. Remaining fuel protected. Ashes checked. A careless camp can lose tomorrow's fire in one lazy evening. So you help as best you can, moving slower now from warmth and fatigue. Tin rattles, water splashes. The ground sucks at every step. Your shoulders feel heavy. Still, each finished task eases the mind a little. When it's finally time to leave the fire, the hardest part is stepping away from it. You feel the cold reassert itself immediately along your sides and back, slipping under the edges of your clothing with practiced cruelty. The darkness beyond the firelight looks thicker than it is, and the path to the tent seems longer in wet boots. You carry with you the smell of smoke and supper, both of which feel more nourishing than they should. Inside the tent, the air is cool and still by comparison. The canvas walls hold in little warmth, but they keep out the wind well enough. You settle down with your hands no longer numb and your stomach no longer hollow. Outside, the campfire continues to crackle faintly, a lower, quieter sound now, as if speaking to itself. Rain taps overhead. Somewhere, a wagon board pops as it cools. The simple labour of feeding flame has given the whole night a shape. You close your eyes and can still picture the coals. They glow behind your thoughts, steady and red, proof that even here, in all this wetness, people know how to make a little sun and gather around it. You wake to the sound of something large giving up. It is not a human voice. Not exactly. It is the long, wet groan of a wagon wheel sinking another inch into softened earth, followed by the muttered response of several exhausted adults who had hoped the ground might show at least a hint of moral character by morning. It has not. The rain eased during the night, but the camp has paid for every hour of it. When you open your eyes and push back the blanket, the light outside the tent is pale and watery, and the whole world seems made of mud, steam, and resigned determination. The air holds that cool scent that comes after heavy soaking. Part crushed grass, part raw soil, part wood smoke gone stale in dampness. Inside the tent, your bedding is only slightly clammy, which counts as excellent news. You sit up and hear the camp already working. Chains clink, a bucket knocks against a wheel. An ox snorts with deep personal disapproval. Someone says, very calmly, that the wagon must not be moved yet. Someone else replies in a tone that suggests they are moving it now out of principle. You pull on your boots and discover that mud has somehow travelled upward in the night, coating the soles, stiffening the edges, and making them feel like artifacts recovered from a bog. When you duck outside, the sight waiting for you is almost grand in its ugliness. The camp has dissolved into tracks, ruts, slick banks, and shallow pools reflecting the grey sky in broken fragments. Wagon wheels stand buried halfway to their hubs. Footpaths have become uncertain trenches. Each step asks a question of the ground, and the ground answers with a wet sucking sound. There is no clean way to move through such a place. You can step carefully, but you cannot step elegantly. Skirts lift, trousers darken, boots disappear to the ankle, and return wearing half the prairie. Even the animals seem offended. Oxen shift their massive weight with caution, hooves sliding slightly before setting firm. A mule plants itself and stares at the world as if it has personally been wronged by geology. You are inclined to agree. Near the centre of camp, a group has gathered around one wagon that settled badly in the night. One wheel has sunk deep in a rut that now looks less like a track and more like an argument between wood and earth. The wagon cover hangs damp and heavy. Water beads along the bows and drops in steady intervals. Beneath it, supplies remain mostly secure, but the vehicle itself has the weary tilt of something that would prefer not to participate any further. You join the others, because mud on the trail turns spectators into labourers very quickly. There is no room for detached observation when a loaded wagon must be coaxed back toward reason. Planks are fetched, brushes dragged in, shovels appear, someone wedges a lever under the axle. Another checks the harness. The oxen are brought forward with the solemn patience of creatures who know. This nonsense will somehow become their responsibility. The first attempt goes badly. The wheel turns, slips, and sinks again with a lush, dreadful sound. Mud spatters boots, hems, and tempers. One man loses balance and sits down abruptly in the very material he had been trying to outsmart. There is a heartbeat of silence. Then laughter breaks out from 3 directions at once. Even he laughs, though with the face of a man who would rather not be sticky in places that have no business becoming sticky. Frontier dignity is always at risk and rarely preserved. You grip the side of the wagon and feel the wood under your palm. Slick and cool. The grain raised by wetness. Iron fittings bite cold into the air. The smell here is strong and layered. Wet wood. Ox hide. Grease from the axle, mud with a rich mineral tang, thick enough to seem almost alive. Somewhere nearby, coffee is brewing, and its bitter warmth drifts across the misery like a promise from a better civilization. There is a practical science to freeing wagons from soft ground. Weight must be shifted. A path must be made. Animals must pull together rather than in panic. Too much force at the wrong angle can break equipment or lame a beast. Too little force wastes effort and spirit alike. Families travelling west quickly learned that road conditions mattered as much as distance. 10 dry miles and 10 muddy miles were not the same thing at all. One was travel. The other was negotiation. You help unload a few items to lighten the wagon. A barrel is rolled aside. Bedding is carried to a less treacherous patch. A box of tools is lifted with care, because dropping metal into mud means spending the next hour searching like a disappointed archaeologist. Every object feels heavier in damp air. Your sleeves brush the wagon cover and come away wetter. Your hands collect a paste of dirt and grease that no amount of wiping fully removes. When the oxen strain again, the whole scene tightens, harness leather pulls taut, the animals lower their heads, muscles stand out beneath wet hides, wheels shift, hesitate, then rise by a fraction. People shove at the spokes. Someone calls out. Someone else nearly loses a boot to the sucking earth and recovers it with language that remains just inside PG-13 territory through what must be a miracle of character. The wagon lurches forward a foot, then another. Mud releases it with obvious resentment. A small cheer goes up. Thin but heartfelt. Success on the trail often looks unimpressive from a distance. Up close, it feels heroic enough. Once the wagon is moved, the work simply spreads elsewhere. Nearly every vehicle bears the marks of the storm. Wheels must be checked for loosened tyres. Hubs need more grease. Brake blocks are examined. Wet ropes are retied. Covers are adjusted where rainwater pooled. Nothing dramatic has happened, and yet everything requires attention. That is the hidden rhythm of emigrant travel. Disaster gets the stories, but maintenance consumes the days. You kneel near one wheel while someone works grease into the hub. The smell is thick and animal, mixed with iron and the sour freshness of disturbed mud. Your fingers brush the spokes. They are swollen slightly from wetness, the wood cool and almost silky under the film of rain. Wagon wheels were marvels of craft for their time, but they were not magical. They shrank in dry climates, swelled in wet ones, loosened, split, and demanded endless care. A good wagon was less a possession than a dependent. Historians generally agree that many emigrants bought or modified farm wagons rather than purpose-built vehicles for the trail. Despite the popular use of the term prairie schooner, the image sounds graceful. The reality was bulkier, rougher, and much more vulnerable to weather and road conditions than legend prefers. Looking at the wheels now, sunk to their rims in brown sludge, you can see how quickly a romantic label collapses under actual conditions. By midday, the rain has stopped but left its signature everywhere. Mist hangs low over the grass beyond camp. The sky remains a flat, stubborn grey. The camp smells warmer now as bodies move, animals breathe, and smoke rises more confidently from cooking fires. Steam lifts from clothing draped over lines or wagon tongues. Blankets hang where they can catch whatever passes for drying weather. A shirt sleeve flaps weakly in the breeze, looking as tired as its owner. You carry water and nearly slide into a rut deep enough to swallow your foot. The path around it is crowded with others making the same miserable calculation. Step through and accept defeat, or step around and court acrobatics. A child chooses the direct route and splashes through with the serene fatalism of youth. An adult watching him closes both eyes for a second, perhaps in prayer, perhaps in exhaustion. Meals continue because they must. You squat near a fire with a tin cup and something hot enough to qualify as comfort. The cup warms your palms. Steam curls up and dampens your face. The food tastes of smoke, salt, and practicality. It is extraordinary how satisfying plain fare can be when eaten after wresting a wagon from mud. Labour gives appetite the manners of a king and the standards of a dock worker. A curious tidbit moves through camp while people eat. Some travellers swore that packing a little loose hay, brush, or even old cloth ahead of a wheel could give just enough purchase to escape a boggy spot. Others insisted that too much stuffing only made a grander mess. Such debates have the tone of ancient military strategy. Though the battlefield is mostly dirt and the casualties are pride and dry socks, the afternoon is devoted to salvaging order. Mud is scraped from steps, spokes, and boot tops with bits of wood or dull knives. Tents are restaked where the ground shifted. Trampled grass is spread over slick patches in hopeful little mats. Feed is managed carefully, so animals do not stand hungry while people fuss over equipment. The camp becomes a moving picture of stooping, lifting, scraping, carrying, and wiping. Nobody stands idle for long because the mud punishes delay. Leave anything unattended, and it becomes wetter, dirtier, heavier, or missing. You notice how sound behaves in this softened landscape. Wheels do not rattle so much as groan. Footsteps squish and drag. Buckets set down on wet ground make a muted thump. The usual sharp edges of noise have been padded by water and soil. Even voices feel lower, as if everyone instinctively conserves energy. Now and then a laugh breaks out, bright and brief, then fades back into labour. Humour still survives here, but it wears work clothes. There is scholarly debate about how emigrants mentally coped with the repetitive frustrations of trail travel, especially conditions that did not qualify as catastrophe, yet steadily drained morale. Diaries reveal complaint, certainly, but also surprising matter-of-factness. A wheel sank, a shoe was lost, the bedding got wet. We moved on. Perhaps this plain style was emotional discipline. Perhaps there was simply no point in writing a sonnet every time the ground behaved badly. Late in the day, a little wind rises. It slides over the camp, cool and damp, but it carries a useful firmness. Hanging cloth stirs. Smoke rises straighter. The worst surface mud begins to crust at the edges. Not dry, exactly, just less eager. People notice at once. Backs straighten. More items are spread out hopefully. A man turns a blanket as though overseeing a delicate scientific experiment. A woman lays out tin plates to air and regards them with the stern optimism of a general reviewing troops. You take a moment beside the animals, where the ground is stamped flat and pungent with manure and wet straw. The oxen stand broad and patient, tails flicking occasionally, ears shifting at flies that have returned with insulting enthusiasm. One presses its nose against your sleeve, leaving a damp mark and a grassy smell. Its breath is warm. Its hide, though wet, radiates a steady animal heat. You rest a hand on its shoulder and feel dense life under skin and muscle, calm and untroubled by any dream of Oregon. As evening edges closer, the camp looks less defeated than it did at dawn. Still muddy, still untidy, still damp in 100 annoying ways, but no longer overwhelmed. Wagons stand firmer, supplies are better arranged. Fires catch more easily. Boots, though filthy, have been reclaimed from disaster. That may be the most honest form of progress out here. Not triumph. Recovery. You return to the tent carrying the day's smells with you. Wet earth, smoke, grease, coffee, leather, animal breath. They cling to your clothes and hands, making you smell like a functioning piece of camp machinery. Inside, the canvas is cool to the touch. The bedding waits in its carefully protected patch of relative dryness. You sit for a moment and listen to the quieter camp beyond the walls. A wheel creaks. Someone shakes mud from a tool. A distant voice says, "Supper is ready." Your body is tired in the blunt, satisfying way that follows necessary work. The mud won many small victories today. It took time, balance, and whatever remained of polished appearance. But it did not keep the camp. It did not keep the wagons. It did not keep you. And on this road, that counts as a very respectable kind of winning. By late afternoon, the camp begins to smell like supper, long before supper truly exists. That is the first mercy of a wet evening. Even while the sky hangs low and the air remains cold enough to sting your fingertips, the scent of food starts moving through the wagons and tents like a quiet promise. Smoke rises in blue threads, grease warms in a pan, damp flour meets water in a bowl and becomes something that, with patience and luck, may resemble bread well enough to satisfy hungry people who have spent the day working in mud. You breathe it all in and feel your stomach answer immediately. Rain has returned. though not in a violent mood. It falls with the steady, whispering persistence of a thing that has settled in for company. It taps against wagon covers, darkens coach shoulders, and beads along ropes in clear lines that tremble before dropping. The camp is used to it now. Nobody pauses to admire the weather, because the weather has become a domestic inconvenience on a grand scale, rather like an uninvited guest who keeps standing in the doorway and dripping onto the floor. You duck beneath the nearest makeshift shelter, a patch of canvas rigged low enough to keep some of the rain off the cooking place, though not all. The fire beneath it glows and smokes with stubborn dignity. A kettle hangs over one side. A pan sits angled over coals. Beside them rests a basin with flour along the rim, a tin cup, a spoon, and a slab of bacon wrapped carefully against the damp. The arrangement is plain, practical, and somehow very comforting. It has the feeling of a kitchen reduced to its essentials and then taken outside against its will. A woman kneads dough with the quick, determined motions of someone who knows that hunger is waiting and the weather will not cooperate out of kindness. Her hands move through flour and wetness, pressing, turning, gathering the sticky mass back into shape each time it threatens to glue itself to the bowl. The smell of raw meal and smoke drifts upward. Another person stirs a pot that sends up a savoury steam touched with beans, salt pork, and whatever herbs or scraps can be spared. Supper on the trail rarely aims for elegance. It aims for heat, fullness, and the ability to keep a person upright through the next day's work. You're given a task at once, which is only fair. Hold the tin, pass the cloth, keep the younger hands away from the hottest iron, break up that bit of salt, blow on the coals if the flame sinks. Cooking here is communal by necessity, because weather and fatigue make solitary domestic perfection impossible. The rain insists on collaboration. One person shields the fire, another mixes, another slices. Another watches the pot and pretends not to notice that the smoke has found the exact line of the wind leading toward human eyes. The scent of bacon begins to deepen, rich and salty, and soon the whole shelter is filled with that glorious smell of fat rendering over heat. It hisses sharply when droplets fall from the roof edge into the pan. A few bright pops leap upward, and somebody jerks back with a muttered complaint that makes everyone smile. Nothing about trail cooking is graceful. The panhandle is too hot, the ground is too slick, the smoke is too eager, yet the food itself takes on an importance that would surprise anyone accustomed to fuller tables. Historians widely note that emigrants going west relied heavily on staples such as flour, bacon, beans, coffee, sugar, rice, and dried goods, though the exact mix varied by family means and region of departure. Fresh food vanished quickly unless hunting, trading, or fortunate conditions provided relief. In wet weather, those dry staples had to be guarded with near-parental devotion. A damp flour sack could turn precious stores into sour paste. Bacon gone bad could poison a camp's good mood, and perhaps its stomachs too. So each meal becomes more than a simple routine. It is inventory management with steam. You lean closer to the warmth and watch dough become supper. A little flour dust clings to the cook's fingers, then turns to paste as rain mist wanders in. The formed cakes are set near the heat, shifted, turned, and watched with the same concentration a jeweller might give to cut stones. There is nothing luxurious about the ingredients, but the transformation still feels faintly magical. Grain and grease, water and fire, salt and patience. Civilization can be reduced to those terms and remain recognizable. Coffee soon joins the air, bitter and dark. The smell rises above the bacon and beans and cuts through the dampness with almost medicinal force. Some emigrants treated coffee with intense seriousness, and once you have spent enough rainy evenings on the prairie, their devotion starts to make emotional sense. Hot coffee does not merely wake the body, it restores morale, settles nerves, warms cold fingers by way of the cup, and gives the mouth something besides wet air and fatigue. It is a drink, yes, but it is also a campfire philosophy. You're handed a cup before the meal is ready, and the heat of it almost surprises you. The tin warms your palms, steam brushes your nose. The first sip is slightly scorched, thin in body and perfect in effect. You feel it pass down your throat and gather in your chest like a small act of rescue. Around you, other cups are lifted, faces ease by degrees, rain still taps above, mud still waits below. But coffee has entered the conversation, and spirits rise a little. There is humour here too, dry and sleepy, and edged with weariness. Someone remarks that a person could probably season stew just by wringing out a trail sock. Another says the bacon has more shelter than the people. A third declares that if the rain keeps up, at least nobody will need to wash the pans because the sky is deeply committed to rinsing everything. This is not brilliant comedy. It does not need to be. Laughter in camp often functions as fuel. Low grade, perhaps, but reliable enough. The meal itself forms in stages. Beans soften in the pot, bacon crisps at the edges, dough cakes brown where the pan allows. A little gravy or fat is stirred with flour and water to make something thick enough to call sauce, if one is feeling generous. Salt is measured carefully. Sugar, if used at all, appears in tiny treasured amounts. People on the trail learn to treat sweetness like ceremony, not habit. A curious tidbit passes around while hands stay busy. Some travellers carried small amounts of dried apple, peach, or other fruit for puddings or stews, not merely for taste but to break the monotony of salted fare. Such treats were used sparingly and sometimes spoken of with a reverence almost comic in its intensity. One spoonful of stewed dried fruit in a wet camp could feel like a visit from a better century. Tonight there is no such extravagance, but the mere mention of it makes a few people smile wistfully into their cups. The rain grows slightly heavier. You hear it patter across the stretched canvas above your head and feel occasional cold droplets sneak through at the edges. One lands on your wrist, another on the back of your neck. The fire snaps in protest. A little smoke rolls low and thick, carrying the smell of wet wood, hot iron, bacon grease, and flour beginning to brown. Your eyes smart. Your stomach tightens in expectation. It is a strange kind of comfort. Sitting in a damp cooking shelter with smoke in your face and mud at your boots, waiting for supper as if nothing on earth could be more natural. And perhaps, for this life, nothing is when the food is finally served. It is simple enough to describe in a few words and powerful enough to silence most conversation. Beans, bacon, bread or cakes, coffee, maybe a little molasses if fortune has not run too far ahead of the wagon. You take your share carefully because every drop spilled feels like a moral failing. The bowl warms your fingers. Steam drifts upward, fragrant with salt and earthiness. The first mouthful is too hot, then deeply satisfying, dense and plain and absolutely welcome. Absolutely. Food in rain has texture beyond the tongue. The heat reaches your face as you bend over the bowl. The smell wraps around you before the taste arrives. The spoon handle feels warm and slightly greasy. Bread tears with a rough softness and leaves floury traces on your fingertips. Bacon snaps gently between your teeth. Beans press into a paste against the roof of your mouth and taste of smoke, salt, and long usefulness. There are grander meals in the world. No doubt, none would feel more deserved. Across the shelter, people eat with focused gratitude. A child licks grease from a thumb and looks briefly radiant. Someone tears bread into a pot to catch the last of the broth. Another tips the cup to capture the final dark mouthful of coffee. These are not manners for formal rooms. These are manners for weather. Waste nothing. Spill little. Eat while it is hot. Guard the warmth long enough for it to settle inside you. Scholars still disagree over how varied the average emigrant diet truly remained once trail monotony set in. Some journals suggest occasional game, traded produce, wild onions, berries, or fish depending on route and opportunity. Others paint a more repetitive picture dominated by bacon, flour, beans, and coffee. With imagination doing much of the seasoning, both may be true. A trail camp changed with luck, season, supply, and skill. But in rain, one suspects variety mattered less than warmth and certainty. You finish the meal slowly, reluctant to surrender the bowl while any heat remains in it. Around the edges of camp, other cooking places are alive with similar scenes. Through rain and drifting smoke, you glimpse bent figures over coals, lifted cups, the glow of fires under low covers, and wagon shadows looming behind them. The entire camp seems joined by the same basic ritual. Feed the flame, heat the food, fill the cup, keep everyone going. It is domestic life stripped of decoration and revealed as something almost sacred. After eating, the ordinary work resumes. Pans must be scraped, cups rinsed with care, grease managed, remaining food covered against damp and wandering animals alike. Nothing may simply be left out. A trail camp that grows careless around provisions invites loss, spoilage, and bitter moods. You help wipe a pan with a scrap of bread, then rinse and dry it as well as conditions allow. Clean on the trail rarely means shining. It means safe enough. The fire settles lower, coals glowing beneath blackened wood. Someone sets another cake near the edge to finish. Someone else tucks away a small packet of coffee as if storing gold. The smell of supper lingers in the damp air and on your sleeves. Your hands carry traces of flour and smoke. Your face feels warmed on one side and cool on the other. This unevenness has become familiar, almost companionable. The rain eases again into a finer mist. With food in you and a little firelight on the faces around you, the evening softens. A person hums for a few lines before trailing off. Another recounts a recipe from home involving butter, eggs, and enough fresh milk to sound nearly mythic. A low murmur of appreciation follows, part hunger, part nostalgia. Memory itself can season a meal, though rather cruelly. You look at the modest spread that made this supper possible, and are struck by how much of the journey rests on such unglamorous things. Flour sacks tied well, bacon packed properly, cups not lost, fire kept alive, someone knowing how to cook in rain without giving in to despair. Great migrations are built from these details as much as from maps and ambition. There is an odd peace in that thought. Not lofty peace, kitchen peace. The kind found in steam rising from a pot while weather presses against the edges of human effort. The kind that comes when people who are cold, damp, and tired still manage to feed one another from plain ingredients and bad conditions. The camp may be temporary, the road uncertain, the sky unhelpful, but supper has happened. That matters. At last you carry your cup away, its heat fading quickly in the cool air. The ground beneath you is still slick, though less menacing with food in your stomach. Smoke follows you in your clothes. Bacon and coffee linger on your breath. Rain purls along the tent lines and slides off in tiny runnels. Somewhere behind you, a pan clinks softly. Someone laughs once more, lower now, contented in a weary way. Inside the tent, the smell of wet canvas meets the smell of supper on your sleeves, and somehow the combination feels almost home-like. You settle onto the bedding with your body no longer hollow. Outside, the campfire murmurs under the rain. Inside, your hands still remember the warmth of the bowl. Hunger has retreated. Cold remains, of course, and dampness too. But they have lost some of their authority. For one evening, beans and bacon, bread and coffee have managed the impossible. They have made a rain-soaked prairie camp feel generous. Night gathers differently when rain has been falling for days. It does not swoop down in a dramatic curtain. It simply thickens the world a little at a time, dimming the last pale edges of sky until the camp seems to float inside a wet and shapeless dark. You settle into the tent with the flap tied down and the blanket drawn close, and the sounds outside begin to take over. In daylight, you can see the camp and make sense of it. At night, under canvas, the ear becomes your lantern. The rain is still there, of course. It never really left. Tonight it falls in a fine, steady sheet, softer than a storm but constant enough to fill every silence. On the roof of the tent it makes a close, intimate tapping, like fingertips across stretched cloth. Along the ropes it runs in tiny streams, then drops at intervals onto the ground below with a patient tick. Somewhere water has gathered on the edge of a wagon cover and now spills off every few moments in a heavier, more deliberate splash. Soon you begin to recognize each kind of sound as if learning the cast of a play. Beneath it all comes the voice of the wagons. A wooden wheel settles with a long creak. A wagon tongue knocks once against a chain. A cover shifts in the light wind and gives a soft, thick rustle like a sail with no sea. Harness leather, wet and strained by use, complains in low little groans when an animal moves in its sleep. These are not noises anyone would call beautiful in ordinary life. Yet here, in the dark, they become oddly soothing. Each sound proves something solid still stands nearby. Wheel, axle, bow, rope. Human effort made visible by day and audible by night. You lie still and listen harder. An ox breathes somewhere close, the sound broad and heavy, followed by the quiet thud of a hoof pressing deeper into softened ground. A mule snorts with sudden irritation, then shakes itself so that tack and strap fittings jingle in a brief metallic cascade. Farther out, a horse stamps twice and falls quiet again. The animals do not sleep in the silent, polished way of storybook creatures. They grunt, breathe, shift, chew, and occasionally express sharp opinions into the darkness. Their sounds give the whole camp its pulse. The air inside the tent feels cool and close. Wet canvas has its own scent at night, deeper now, mixed with wool, earth, and the faint smoke that still lingers in your clothing. Your blanket scratches lightly at your chin. One hand rests near your boots, and even in the dark you can imagine the line of mud drying along their edges. The ground beneath the bedding is firm in some places and less trustworthy in others. You know every unevenness by feel now. A shoulder blade meets one hard spot. A hip finds another. Sleep on the trail is not luxurious. It is negotiated. Outside, as voices drift through the rain, they are low and blurred by canvas and weather, never quite distinct enough to catch whole sentences. A murmur here, a brief laugh there. Someone calling softly to settle an animal. Someone answering from near the fire. These sounds do not carry far. The rain presses them downward, wraps them in mist, and lets only fragments through. In the darkness, each human voice feels smaller, yet somehow more precious. You cannot see the faces, but you know they are there, bent under hats and blankets, finishing chores, checking lines, making the last adjustments before sleep. One voice rises briefly in song, only a few notes. Then it fades, perhaps from self-consciousness, perhaps from simple tiredness. The little piece of melody hangs in your mind longer than expected. Music at night in camp is like a match struck in wind, brief, fragile, and enough to change the feel of the darkness. There is a strange intimacy in hearing people you cannot see. You notice the habits of strangers through sound alone. One person clears the throat before speaking every time. Another has a laugh that starts with a cough and ends in a snort. Somewhere a child gives a short, sleepy protest and then goes quiet after a few murmured words from an adult. In the dark, identity is made from rhythm and tone. People become sound patterns held together by rain. Historians often note that overland travel involved an immense amount of shared living, yet private space remained scarce and fragile. Night under tents and wagons did not bring complete solitude. It brought a different kind of closeness, where you heard the camp breathe around you. The details varied from diary to diary, but the basic truth remains easy to imagine. On the trail, you were seldom alone, even while lying in the dark with your own thoughts. Company lived just beyond the canvas wall. A sudden sharper noise cuts through everything. A pan slips somewhere and strikes the ground with a clatter bright enough to make you jump. A muttered voice follows. Then another voice, amused. The rain continues as if entirely unimpressed by kitchen drama. You let your breath out slowly and smile into the blanket. Life in camp never becomes fully silent, because too many objects exist in unstable arrangements, and too many tired people still have one last thing to do. Wind moves lightly across the prairie and touches the tent. The canvas shivers once. The guy lines hum faintly for a second. Then stillness returns, if such a word can exist in a world filled with dripping, breathing, and shifting. That is the character of night here. Not quiet, layered. The darkness is alive with small practical sounds, each one proof of matter and weather meeting in real time. A curious trail belief comes to mind while you listen. Some travellers claimed they could judge the weather for morning by the night sounds of their animals, insisting that restless stock foretold change better than clouds did. Others trusted the smell of the air or the direction of the faintest breeze. Whether any of these methods work consistently is another matter. Human beings love patterns, especially when crossing vast landscapes under uncertain skies. A person hearing enough rain on the enough nights will eventually start assigning prophecy to a mule sneeze. The campfire, though reduced now, still contributes its own note. Occasionally a coal gives a soft crack. Once in a while a damp stick collapses inward with a hiss, and a gentle shower of sparks no one can see from inside the tent. Fire at this hour sounds less like labour and more like thought. Slow, intermittent, almost inward. You imagine its red centre settling under ash, preserving morning in secret. Your ears grow more selective as the night deepens. At first the rain seemed to fill all space. Now individual details separate themselves from the wash. Dripping off the wagon axle, a leather strap tapping against wood, the wet swish of a tail across animal hide. The distant call of some night creature beyond camp, thin and uncertain in the damp. Frogs perhaps, or insects encouraged by standing water. The prairie has its own nocturnal orchestra, and the emigrant camp has been added to it with wheels, pans, ropes, and soft human noises. Scholars still debate how strongly later memory shaped emigrant descriptions of night on the trail. A journal written beside a lantern has one texture. A recollection written 30 years later has another. Fear may be heightened in memory, so may peace. Darkness tends to invite both exaggeration and poetry, yet certain sensory facts are too practical to doubt. Canvas magnified rain. Animals never ceased moving entirely. Wagons spoke in wood and iron, and the darkness beyond a small camp could feel very large indeed. That largeness presses on the edges of your thoughts now. You cannot see the prairie, but you sense its open reach beyond the camp, stretching outward under cloud and mist. No street lamps, no house windows, no distant town glow, just wet grass, unseen ground, and a sky whose shape is guessed more than known. It makes the little sounds of camp seem all the more human. A cough, a cup set down, a boot scraping mud from a sole. These are tiny declarations against the vast dark. You turn onto one side and the blanket shifts with a whisper. The canvas wall is not far from your face. Beyond it comes the soft repeated brush of rain on grass. That sound is different from rain on cloth or wood. Gentler, finer. The whole prairie outside is being stroked into deeper darkness. You imagine the wagon wheels standing black and wet, the animals broad-backed and still, the dying fire tucked low under its little crust of ash. Then comes a coyote, not close, not dangerously close, just a long wavering call somewhere out on the open land, thin at first and then stronger, rising through the wet night in a way that makes the hair at your neck notice before the rest of you does. Another answers farther away, then silence returns. The camp does not erupt. No panic follows. The trail passed through lands where such sounds were familiar enough. Still, hearing wild voices beyond the ring of wagons changes the feeling of the dark. It reminds you that the camp is a pocket, not a kingdom. You listen for more and hear only the old companions again. Rain, wagon creak, ox breath, drip from canvas, a human murmur now almost gone. Night on the trail has a way of folding alarm back into routine until even a coyote becomes one more note in the composition. There were times when emigrants told stories after dark about wolves, storms, strange lights, or noises in the grass that proved to be less than supernatural. Most of those tales probably grew with retelling, as tales always do when people are tired and weather-bound. The quirky thing is not that such stories existed, it is that anyone had the energy to tell them after a full day of mud, repairs, cooking, and animal care. Imagination, apparently, survives where comfort does not. The longer you lie listening, the more the sounds settle your body instead of keeping it alert. Even the creaks become rhythmic. The drip near the flap marks time. The breathing of the animals gives the camp a slow and living cadence. The rain above your head ceases to be an intrusion and becomes a kind of roof music, repetitive and unadorned. You're still aware of discomfort. The ground is still hard. The air remains cool. Your shoulder wants a better mattress, and your neck would gladly file a formal complaint. Yet the night soundscape wraps around these inconveniences and gently blunts them. At some point, the last clear voice outside disappears. That is how you know the camp has mostly surrendered to sleep. Only the non-human sounds remain, plus the occasional involuntary human one. A snore starts somewhere nearby, pauses, then resumes with a confidence almost admirable. Another sleeper coughs once. Somewhere a baby sighs rather than cries. The rain listens to them all and keeps falling. You feel yourself drifting now, not because the night is silent, but because it is full in a steady, dependable way. Every sound has found its place. Nothing demands action. No sudden leak, no shouted warning, no wheel sinking. Just the ordinary music of a camp held together by canvas, rope, fire, and shared fatigue. Your last waking awareness is not visual at all. It is sound. The soft drumming above you, the low creak beyond you, the breathing of the animals in the dark, and the vast rain wrapped around all of it like one endless whispered note. By now, the rain is no longer the whole problem. That would almost be simpler. A single enemy, a single inconvenience. Something you could point to with dramatic conviction while holding a cup of bad coffee. But after enough wet days on the trail, the real trouble begins to spread into smaller corners of life. Tempers fray, patience thins, tiny mistakes feel unusually personal, a dropped spoon becomes a grievance, a wet blanket becomes a philosophy. You sit beneath the grey afternoon and begin to understand that the Oregon Trail does not always defeat people with grand disasters. Sometimes it works by slow abrasion. The camp is upright and functioning, which is not the same thing as cheerful. Fires still burn, animals are fed, tents stand, meals appear with reliable plainness. Yet something in the air has changed. It is not only the smell of damp canvas and smoke, it is the quieter human scent of fatigue. Voices are flatter, movements are more economical. People do not waste as many words because words, like flour and bacon, are easier to spare in fair weather. You notice it first at breakfast. A cup goes missing. That happens. Cups on the trail slip under bedding, get left by fires, vanish into wagons, and occasionally seem to migrate of their own free will. Normally this would invite mild annoyance and a brief search. This morning it invites a look between two adults so pointed it could have stitched canvas. No one says anything dramatic. Someone mutters that the cup was here last night. Someone else replies that perhaps it walked west on its own. The line is meant as humour. It lands halfway and stays there, damp like everything else. That is the camp in miniature now. Still functioning, still speaking, still able to joke. But the jokes arrive with tired edges. You take your share of breakfast and sit where a wagon blocks some of the wind. The food is hot, which helps. The coffee is hotter, which helps more. Steam brushes your face. The tin cup warms your palms. Nearby, a child asks an innocent question for the third time and receives an answer that is technically polite and spiritually exhausted. The child, to his credit, wanders off in search of more promising company. Trail children learn early which adults are available for conversation and which are currently one muddy boot away from composing a tragedy. Rain hangs in the air without committing fully. It falls, pauses, returns as mist, then sharpens again. The whole sky seems unable to make up its mind, though it insists on remaining unpleasant throughout. A wagon cover flaps once in the breeze, and the sound is enough to make one man turn and glare at it, as if it had spoken out of turn. You understand the feeling. After several days of discomfort, even objects begin to seem sarcastic. The work of the day continues. Of course. Something always needs adjusting. A harness strap has rubbed wrong, a tent line has loosened. A sack must be shifted to keep it from damp. One wheel needs checking again because nobody trusts mud to stop causing trouble just because it has already caused plenty. You move from task to task with the same steady rhythm as everyone else. But the mood in camp has become quieter, tighter, more inward. Fatigue does peculiar things to the mind. It narrows thought. It turns the present moment into a little kingdom with very strict borders. You stop imagining the wide promise of Oregon and start caring intensely about whether the corner of your bedding stays dry for the next 6 hours. Your world becomes immediate. Cup, coat, fire, rope, boot, bread, weather. Human ambition is a magnificent thing in speeches, in camp, under rain. It often looks like someone trying not to drop the bacon in the mud. Yet humour survives. It survives because people need it to. Near midday, while scraping muck from a wagon step, one traveller announces that by the time they reach Oregon, they will be able to grow potatoes directly from their hems. Another replies that his boots now weigh more than his faith. A woman hanging cloth to air says she no longer remembers her original colour and may have become naturally brown below the knee. These remarks do not produce roaring laughter. They produce the better kind, the tired kind, small, brief, and sincere. You find yourself laughing too, and the relief of it surprises you. Laughter loosens something in the chest that the damp had tightened. For a moment the camp sounds more alive. Tin rattles. Someone snorts into a sleeve. Even the animals seem less solemn, though that may simply be your improved mood. Gentle sarcasm is one of the more useful frontier tools. It weighs nothing, requires no barrel space, and can keep a person's spirit from souring like badly stored flour. Historians generally agree that trail morale rose and fell with ordinary conditions more than popular legend suggests. Great danger certainly mattered, but so did weather, boredom, illness, food monotony, and the endless pressure of chores. Diaries often reveal not constant heroism, but cycles of irritation, humour, worry, routine, and stubborn continuation. In that sense, the emotional life of a wagon camp was probably far more familiar than the mythology allows. People did not become symbols because they crossed a continent. They remained themselves, only wetter. The strain shows in quieter ways too. One person sits longer than usual after finishing a task, hands idle in the lap, staring at nothing visible. Another refolds the same blanket twice because attention has gone soft around the edges. A third starts to speak, forgets the point, then waves a hand as if dismissing the thought like smoke. Nobody is collapsing, nobody is dramatic. That is what makes it so recognizable. This is the weariness of people who have been competent for too many days in a row. You carry a bucket across camp and feel every step in your shoulders. The weight is not enormous. Still, your arms ache from earlier days that have not yet left the body. That is another trick of trail fatigue. No labour arrives fresh. Each task joins the residue of the last 10. Your palms are rubbed tender where rope and handle have pressed. Your back keeps a quiet account of every awkward lift. Even your face feels tired from squinting through smoke and mist. The animals seem subdued as well. Oxen stand with their usual dense patience, but their hides are streaked and dull in the flat light. A mule pins its ears when a strap is adjusted, then thinks better of the protest and merely exhales. Horses flick their tails at flies that have returned as if no amount of rain could insult them into leaving permanently. The creatures are working through their own version of the same weather. No wonder the whole camp has a slightly worn expression. A curious tidbit circulates while people work. Some emigrants believe that singing while marching or doing camp chores kept spirits up and the body moving more steadily, though actual success depended entirely on the singers involved. This sounds lovely until you imagine several tired adults, half wet and fully annoyed, attempting harmony over axle grease and mud. Perhaps the intention mattered more than the melody. The rain tapers off by afternoon, leaving only a dripping hush and a pale smear of light behind the clouds. For the first time in days, the camp can hear itself more clearly. Without the constant patter overhead, smaller sounds reappear with fresh sharpness, knife on wood, spoon in pot, the little grunt someone makes while standing up from a crouch, a distant child inventing a game with a stick and a puddle. Silence itself feels strange, as if the sky has stepped back just far enough for human thoughts to be heard again. That new quiet makes some people softer and others more irritable. Weather often serves as a curtain. When it lifts, Whatever waited behind it becomes visible. A disagreement starts over the best way to dry blankets. Not a fierce disagreement. Nothing memorable enough for history books. Just two tired people defending techniques with the solemn conviction usually reserved for constitutional matters. One argues for spreading them under the wagon cover. Another insists they need real air and no more half measures. Both are correct and both are exhausted, which is why the issue becomes larger than blanket science ought to allow. You pretend to busy yourself nearby while absorbing the lesson. On the trail, many quarrels are not really about what they appear to be about. They are about dampness, hunger, poor sleep, private worry, aching feet, uncertainty, and the sheer insult of being rained on by a continent. The blanket merely volunteers as a convenient symbol. Scholars still debate how often emigrant diaries soften domestic conflict for the sake of posterity, family pride, or simple habit. It is easy to imagine that some accounts reduced arguments to polite phrases or omitted them entirely, yet the surviving records still reveal enough friction to reassure you that westward migration did not turn households into choirs of perfect cooperation. People remained gloriously, inconveniently human. Late in the day, a little brightness enters the western sky. Not sunshine exactly. More a thinning of grey that allows the camp to imagine sunshine somewhere beyond the cloud wall. The effect on morale is absurdly immediate. Heads lift, items are laid out to air with renewed optimism. One person actually whistles 3 whole notes before thinking better of it. Hope on the trail can be embarrassingly easy to tempt. Offer a dry breeze, and everyone starts behaving as if civilization has sent an apology. You take advantage of the easing weather to clean what you can. Mud is scraped from boots again. The tent entrance is tidied. A garment is shaken out and rehung. The repetitive nature of these tasks would be maddening if they were not also oddly calming. There is comfort in small restoration. A cleaner cup, a drier sleeve, a line pulled taut. Each one says the day has not entirely had its way with you. A woman near the fire begins recounting, with straight-faced seriousness, the many luxuries she intends to demand upon returning to ordinary life. A floor, a chair with all legs equal, bread that does not taste faintly of smoke, dry stockings chosen from abundance rather than strategy, a bed high enough off the ground that nobody needs to inspect it for puddle politics. The list grows more extravagant and more ridiculous. Soon others add to it. Porcelain, feather pillows, a bathtub, a servant solely responsible for keeping spoons from vanishing. This time the camp laughs properly. The laughter rolls out over the damp camp and lingers. It is not elegant. Some of it breaks into coughing. Some ends in sighs. But it clears the air better than the breeze. You realize that what people are protecting out here is not only their bodies and supplies, they're also protecting the tiny spark of personality that constant hardship tries to flatten. Jokes, complaints, exaggerated dreams of dry beds. These are acts of preservation too. By evening, the mood has steadied, not joyful, not refreshed, simply steadier. Supper is prepared with less silence than the day began with. Cups are found. Blankets are arranged. Someone apologizes for being sharp earlier, though in that trail fashion which avoids direct mention of the actual words used. Another accepts without ceremony. The camp settles into its practical habits again, bruised a little, but intact. You sit inside the tent as darkness gathers and think about how strange endurance can be. It is rarely dramatic from the inside. It feels more like repetition with a pulse. Get up. Pull the rope tighter, warm the coffee, shift the blanket, laugh if possible, continue. The body adapts, the mood wavers, the camp survives another day of itself. Outside, a few drops begin again on the canvas roof. Not enough to threaten, just enough to remind you that the sky still has opinions. You almost laugh. Of course it does. And somehow, after all the frayed tempers, lost cups, tired jokes, and carefully managed irritation, you find that you can bear even that. At first, you do not trust the light. It arrives so quietly that it seems like a trick of tired eyes rather than a true change in the weather. You wake inside the tent and notice that the canvas above you looks different. Not bright, certainly not cheerful, but less oppressive somehow. as if the sky has loosened its grip by a single careful notch. The air feels cooler and cleaner. The usual drum of rain is missing. In its place comes a softer world of dripping, distant animal breath, and the small waking noises of camp beginning again. You lie still for a moment, listening for the return of it. Nothing. Just runoff falling from the tent line in slow drops, a wheel creaking somewhere as someone shifts weight against it, an ox exhaling with that deep, grassy heaviness you now know so well, a faint clink of tin, a low human voice, not strained or hurried, simply speaking. The silence left by the rain feels almost sacred, not empty, full of possibility. You sit up and push the blanket aside. The bedding is cool but not wet. The tent smells of canvas and wool, smoke, and the damp earth below, though even that scent has changed. It is less sharp now, less raw. The whole world seems to be pausing between one condition and another. You pull on your boots, still marked by yesterday's mud, and duck outside into a morning that looks like it has not yet decided what it wants to become. The camp is washed clean in some places and badly rumpled in others. Puddles still sit in the low ground, reflecting a pale sky the colour of old pewter. The grass beyond the wagons glistens with water. Every rope, spoke, and wagon bars carries a line of moisture catching what little light there is. But overhead, the cloud cover has thinned, not broken entirely, just softened. In the east, the grey is lighter. In the west, there is shape rather than one flat wall of weather. After so many sodden days, even these modest improvements feel grand enough to deserve a parade. People emerge from tents and wagons with the cautious expressions of those who have been disappointed before. Nobody wants to announce victory too soon and summon the rain back out of spite. Instead, the mood spreads quietly. Shoulders are not as rounded. Voices carry a bit more life. One person lifts a face toward the sky, studies it for a long second, and says only, "Well." Yet that one word contains relief, suspicion, and hope in equal measure. The first real sign comes from the fires. Without active rain to fight, flame rises more easily. Smoke goes upward instead of flattening against the air. The smell of breakfast spreads quicker and cleaner through camp. Coffee seems to boil with less argument. A pan hisses in a more cheerful tone. You stand near the warmth and feel a small breeze move across your cheek. It is cool, but it has a different character than before. It carries drying weather in it, faint and almost shy. Breakfast tastes better this morning, though the food is much the same. Bread or cakes, bacon, beans perhaps, coffee certainly. Yet every bite seems lifted by the simple fact that no water is currently falling into it from the sky. You hold the cup in both hands and watch steam rise straight upward. Such a tiny sight, and still it feels like a blessing. Around you, camp life begins to lean outward again. Blankets are carried into open air. Shirts are hung over wagon tongues. Bedding is shaken and spread where it can catch what little sun may come. A person would think these families had discovered gold in the grass, when really they have only discovered a few hours without rain. You help drag bedding from the tent and lay it carefully over a line and the side of a wagon. The blanket feels heavy with old dampness, rough against your hands, but the breeze touches it at once. Cloth stirs, steam rises faintly from darker folds. It is one of the most satisfying sights on the trail. Not dramatic, not picturesque, just fabric finally getting a fair chance. The camp becomes full of such quiet victories. Boots turned upside down to air, tin plates drying, harness spread for inspection, flour sacks checked and resettled. Even the animals seem to notice the change, flicking their ears and shifting with a little more ease. A wagon nearby is already being repaired, not because it is broken in some grand cinematic way, but because wet weather never leaves equipment untouched. One wheel needs attention, a cracked board must be reinforced, a loosened rope is replaced. A corner of the cover gets adjusted where standing water warped the line. You move over to help, and soon your hands are busy with the familiar work of camp maintenance. Lift this, hold that, pass the tool, pull the rope tighter. The wood feels different this morning, less slick, beginning to lose its cold wet sheen. Iron still bites the skin with chill, but the air around it has changed. There is movement in it now, a breath of drying day. Historians generally agree that delays on the overland trails often became repair days, whether emigrants planned them or not. Wet weather, rough crossings, and poor roads constantly tested wheels, axles, covers, and harness. Progress west depended as much on maintenance as on miles travelled. Looking around camp now, you can see that plainly. The first clear morning after long rain does not belong to rest. It belongs to recovery, and yet recovery has a sweetness all its own. People work faster today, not because they are less tired, but because effort suddenly feels useful in a visible way. During the endless wet, every task seemed defensive. Protect the bedding, rescue the fire, keep mud from taking over entirely. Now tasks feel constructive again. Dry, mend, arrange, prepare. Movement has direction. The camp no longer feels pinned in place by the sky. It feels like an organism stretching after fever. A child runs across the edge of camp and is immediately called back from a puddle that still looks deep enough to preserve a shoe forever. The child laughs anyway. That laugh catches easily. A woman at the fire smiles into her cup. A man scraping mud from a wheel begins humming under his breath. Even the jokes sound less like emergency medicine and more like actual humour. Someone claims the sun is hiding because it is ashamed to have missed so many days of duty. Another says if the weather improves much more, people may be forced to remember their own faces beneath the grime. You kneel beside a pile of gear being sorted and catch the mixed scent of leather, wet canvas, smoke, stale flour dust, and fresh morning air. It is a complicated smell, but no longer a hopeless one. You lift a bag, shake out a cloth, and discover that even the touch of objects feels different when they are drying rather than merely enduring. Wool loses its clammy resistance. Rope gives less cold water to the hand. The tent wall, when you brush against it, is still damp but not dripping. That distinction matters more than anyone back east would believe. There is also the sound of scraping everywhere. Mud from boots, mud from steps, mud from spokes, mud from whatever else has become unrecognisable under a brown coat. Bits of wood, dull knives, sticks, and fingers all go to work. The camp sounds like 100 choir acts of reclamation. Scrape, shake, knock, fold, retie. In the absence of rain, human activity becomes the main music again. A curious old belief resurfaces in conversation while people work. Some travellers insisted that several days of rain were often followed by a stretch of fine weather, strong enough to make up for all the misery at once. Others distrusted any improvement and swore that the plains enjoyed giving false hope before another soaking. You hear both opinions offered with complete seriousness. Weather creates philosophers very quickly when shelter is thin. By midday, the western edge of the cloud cover frays enough to let through actual sunlight. It is not broad, not blazing. More a soft pale spill that reaches the camp in scattered patches. Yet the effect is immediate and almost theatrical. Wet wagon covers begin to shine. Puddles flash silver. A line of blankets brightens as if from within. Steam lifts from darker ground where the warmth touches it. For a moment the entire camp pauses to notice. Nobody makes a speech. Nobody kneels in gratitude. People just look. You look too, and feel something unclench deep inside. Sunlight after long rain does not merely illuminate, it restores proportion. The prairie beyond camp comes back into shape. Grass shows green instead of dull grey. The horizon reappears. The wagons no longer seem like stranded hulks in a watery world. They are vehicles again, waiting. Readiness returns to the scene. Scholars still debate how emigrants measured progress emotionally during long delays, since diaries often compress days that must have felt enormous while living them. A few plain lines may cover a week of damp frustration. Then suddenly, one sentence mentions a fine morning, as if relief needed no elaboration. Perhaps that is because its effects were obvious to everyone present. Light improved labour. Dryness improved tempers. Hope returned not as a speech but as a practical condition. The animals are tended with fresh care. Harness is checked and rehung. Hooves are cleaned as well as possible. Feed is measured. One ox leans into its brushing with dense, patient pleasure, as if secretly approving the change in climate while refusing to appear sentimental. A horse tosses its head and stamps at a patch of softening ground. The camp smells stronger now in the warming air. Manure, leather, smoke, grease, sun-touched canvas, and crushed wet grass all rise together. It is not a refined perfume, but it speaks of life moving forward. You return to the tent and begin preparing it to come down. That realization arrives almost gently. The tent that has been refuge, your worry, and nightly companion through all the wet may soon be packed again. You loosen a line, test a peg, feel the canvas yielding more willingly in your hands. The fabric is rough, still cool in the shaded places, but the edges are drying. Water no longer gathers at every fold. The smell of it has changed from storm-soaked cloth to something nearer dust waiting to return. Packing camp after rain is as much judgment as labour. What is dry enough to stow? What still needs airing? What can risk another hour in the breeze? Nobody wants to pack moisture deep into bedding or provisions and carry trouble forward into the road. So the work goes slowly, carefully. People fold, refold, inspect, and wait. Waiting feels different now too. It is no longer helpless. It is strategic. The fires burn down to cooking levels by afternoon, and the camp settles into that purposeful hum that comes before movement. Repairs are nearly done. Goods are restacked, covers are tightened, children are gathered, then wander, then gathered again. A few wagon tongues are lifted and set down experimentally. Wheel ruts are studied. The road ahead is discussed with caution, because no one wants to trade optimism for axle-deep disaster. But the possibility is there now. The day has opened it. You stand for a moment at the edge of camp and look outward. The prairie still bears the storm's mark. Low places glisten. The track ahead is dark with moisture. The sky remains mottled with cloud. Yet in the distance there is brightness, a thinning so clear it seems to pull the eye westward. The breeze touches your face, smelling of clean wet grass and sun-warming old mud. For the first time in what feels like an age, the world does not seem to be closing in. It seems to be breathing out. When evening comes, it does not feel trapped. The camp is tidier now, more compact, more prepared. Supper is cooked with steadier hands. Conversation rises more easily. One person says tomorrow may be a road day if the ground holds. Nobody answers too quickly. Still, the idea remains in the air like smoke, visible and welcome. Back inside the tent for what may be one of the last times in this place, you settle onto bedding that is drier than it has been in days. Outside, only a few drops fall from branches of tied gear or canvas edges. No new rain begins. The silence above the roof feels almost luxurious. You listen to the camp breathing around you, to the lighter voices, the calmer animals, the faint clink of things being made ready. Morning did not bring perfection. It brought something better for people on this road. It brought the sense that weather can end, repairs can hold, and hope can return by cautious schedules, practical degrees. The morning begins with motion, not hurried motion, not cheerful in any loud, careless way. But the camp has changed its posture at last. You wake to the sounds of buckles, chains, low voices, and wooden parts being lifted into place. Instead of the slow, domestic rhythm of weather-bound days, there is purpose in every noise. A wagon tongue rises, a crate is shifted, harness rings tap against damp leather. Somewhere an ox gives a patient breath, as if already resigned to the work ahead. The rain is gone for now, leaving behind a pale sky and a world that still glistens from its long visit. You push aside the blanket and sit up in the tent, taking in the air one more time. The canvas still smells of moisture, though fainter now, mixed with smoke, earth, wool, and the softer scent of things drying at last. The ground below the bedding remains firm in some places and uneven in others, but it no longer feels like an enemy preparing fresh mischief. It feels merely used, lived on, pressed by knees, boots, and sleep. Even a patch of earth can acquire memory. When you step outside, the whole camp seems smaller than it did in rain. Not literally smaller, of course. The wagons are the same size and the animals are the same broad shapes, The tents the same faded cloth and practical lines, yet without the curtain of falling water and the heaviness of endless grey, everything appears more definite. The horizon is visible again. The prairie beyond camp stretches in long, damp bands of green and brown. Touched here and there by weak sunlight, wheel ruts still hold water. Low places shine silver, but the world has edges. That alone feels like a gift. People move through the camp with the peculiar energy of travellers about to resume the road. It is a blend of relief, caution, and the quiet anxiety that always comes before departure. Goods are checked and checked again. Blankets are folded tight. Tins are counted. Tools are secured. A child is called away from a puddle. Another child is found sitting on something that needs loading. A woman ties a sack, reties it, then gives the knot one final suspicious look. This is how journeys restart, not in a blaze of glory, but in 1,000 small acts of readiness. You go back to the tent and begin taking it down. The process feels almost intimate. Your hands know each cord now, each stubborn peg, each fold where water once gathered. The canvas is cool beneath your fingers, rough and slightly stiff where it has dried. When you loosen the lines, the tent surrenders its shape with a soft, slackening sound. More sigh than collapse. You pull the pegs from the ground one by one. Each comes free with a little resistance from the damp earth, and each release feels like the ending of a conversation. The cloth settles into your arms with surprising weight. Wet weather has left its memory in it. Even drying canvas carries the heft of hard use. You spread it for a moment in the light to inspect for damage. A darkened seam here, a rubbed corner there. Nothing ruinous, just the ordinary marks of service. You run a hand over one panel and feel the rough weave under your palm. This plain shelter has held off rain, wind, and darkness by the thinnest sufficient margin. That is no small achievement. Nearby, others are doing the same. Tents vanish into bundles. Fires are reduced and managed. Wagon covers are retightened. Animals are led into place. Voices rise and fall with practical questions. Has the flour been stowed? Where is the wrench? Which barrel goes first? Who moved the extra rope? Camp sounds less like a household now and more like machinery beginning to turn. Historians generally agree that emigrant parties on the overland trails often started early when conditions allowed, taking advantage of cooler hours and firmer ground before later sun or traffic worsened the road. Timing mattered. A track that seemed manageable at dawn could turn difficult by afternoon depending on use, weather, and terrain. You look out at the road and understand why. It is no smooth avenue. It is a scar through wet ground, marked by deep ruts, hoof prints, and the evidence of many hopeful people dragging their futures west. Breakfast is eaten quickly, though not carelessly. Hot food before a road day matters even more than usual. Coffee steams in tin cups. Bacon gives off its familiar rich smell. Bread, cakes, or beans go down with steady efficiency. The mood is not festive. It is steadier than that. People are feeding work, not celebrating escape. Yet underneath the plain movements, there is relief. Movement itself feels like relief after too many days pinned under weather. You take your cup and stand for a moment beside the wagon that will carry so much of camp away. Its wheels still wear dried mud in thick ridges. The cover smells faintly of wet canvas and dust waking underneath. The wood is cool to the touch, but no longer slick. Iron bands catch the morning light in dull lines. You rest a hand against the side and feel the solid reality of it. This creaking, awkward, overworked thing is less a vehicle than a floating little world, carrying blankets, tools, food, clothing, and the fragile domestic order that turns travel into survival. Loading proceeds with a seriousness that borders on ritual. Heavier items first, fragile things where they will not shift, bedding where it can be reached if needed. Small possessions tucked into corners with care. Nothing may rattle too much, crush too easily, or invite rain if the sky changes its mind again. The wagon becomes a puzzle of weight and foresight. You pass up a sack, then a box, then a rolled blanket. Each piece disappears into its place. Each one matters. A quirky practical habit appears again as boots, tools, and small gear are stowed. People tuck objects into odd little protected spaces, not because it looks orderly, but because they know exactly what jostling roads and surprise weather can do. A cup wedged in cloth survives. A cup left loose becomes prairie property. Trail wisdom often sounds simple because it is learned the hard way. The animals are yoked or harnessed with patient routine. Oxen step forward, broad and solemn, their hides carrying the warm smell of life and labour. Leather creaks as straps are checked. A buckle is adjusted. A trace is lifted clear. One animal turns its head just enough to blow a heavy breath against your sleeve, leaving warmth and the scent of wet grass. These creatures have waded through the same rain, stood through the same mud, and will now pull the same burden back into motion. There is something humbling in their calm. Scholars still debate how much emigrants idealized the movement westward, while underestimating the endless plain labour that sustained it. The big ideas were land, hope, chance, and future. The daily reality was mending, lifting, cooking, scraping, tying, drying, and urging animals through bad ground. Standing in camp this morning, you can feel how both truths lived side by side. People needed the dream. They also needed dry flour and working wheels. The order to move, when it comes, is almost disappointingly modest. No trumpet, no grand call, just a spreading readiness, a crack of voice here, a step forward there, a wheel beginning to turn. The first wagon shifts in its rut, then rolls. Another follows. Harness tightens, hooves press into soft earth. The long still camp begins to unmake itself into a line. You climb or walk into position and feel the first tug of departure in your body. Wheels groan, axles complain, mud resists, then releases. The wagon lurches with that familiar uneven motion that makes every object inside reconsider its loyalties. The ground is still soft enough to be troublesome, but not soft enough to stop you. That difference is everything. As the line moves out, the old campsite slowly recedes into shape and then memory. Fire circles dark on the ground, flattened grass where tents stood, ruts cut deep by waiting and loading, a place made by necessity and then abandoned to weather and time. The prairie is full of such temporary lives. People arrive, endure, repair, move on. The land keeps almost none of the details, though those who slept there carry them for a long while. The road ahead is not dry, but it is passable. Wheels throw off bits of old mud. Hooves press water into the soil with dull sounds. The wagon cover above gives off a faint smell as warming air touches it, a mixture of canvas, smoke, dust, and lingering damp. It is a scent so particular that it seems capable of preserving whole days within it. Rainy evenings, cold mornings, supper steam, wet rope, muddy boots lined by the entrance, a campfire breathing smoke into wool. All of it clings in the fibres. You look around as the train moves. The prairie opens again in every direction, washed clean in some places and scarred in others. Grass bends under the breeze, puddles brighten under passing light. Distant clouds still travel the horizon, but they no longer feel like jailers. They are weather again, not a sentence. A bird lifts from the grass. Somewhere behind, someone laughs at a jolt or a complaint from a pan. The road is difficult. The morning is plain, yet the movement itself steadies the spirit. There is a particular sound wagons make once they have settled into motion after a delay. It is not one sound, but several layered together. Wheel rumble, harness creak, chain clink, the soft thud of hooves, the shifting murmur of goods inside. Human voices calling now and then fading. This rolling music replaces the static sounds of camp and tells the body a new truth. You are not waiting anymore. A small stretch of sunlight reaches the trail and brightens the backs of the oxen. Steam lifts faintly from the darker patches of earth. The wheels leave fresh marks in the road, clean-edged at first, then quickly blurred by the next wagon. Progress out here is rarely dramatic enough to feel like history while living it. It feels like inches added patiently to a difficult track. You pass a place where the ground still holds standing water, and the reflections in it catch a broken image of the wagon cover above. Canvas, sky, moving wheel, then it is gone behind you. Another rut, another rise, another patch of grass pressed flat by earlier travellers. The road keeps offering small proofs that countless others have struggled along this same line of earth. Hope, apparently, leaves grooves. By midday, the rhythm of travel begins to settle into the body again. The ache of waiting is replaced by the ache of motion. Different muscles take over, different tasks call. Yet there is relief in this, because movement carries meaning even when it's slow. Each turn of the wheel says the camp is behind you. Each creak of harness says the day belongs to the road again. The smells of departure remain close. Smoke in your clothes, leather warming in the air, damp canvas slowly giving way to dust, animal breath, the faint salt trace of breakfast on your fingers. These are the scents of a journey not polished by memory yet, still raw and practical. They do not describe a grand legend. They describe a real day on a real trail, where people gather their small world every morning and ask it to keep rolling. As afternoon light softens, you feel the weariness of travel return, but it is a cleaner weariness than the stale frustration of being pinned in one place. The wheels turn, the line advances, the prairie receives you once more. Somewhere ahead lies another camp, another fire, another patch of ground to bargain with. That is the plain truth of the trail. One shelter packed, another waiting to be made. And yet for now, the road itself is enough. You ride or walk beneath a sky no longer pressing down, carrying the smell of rain, smoke, canvas, and campfire with you as the wagon train leans west into open country. The sounds settle into rhythm, the wheels keep turning, and evening, when it comes, will find you farther on. The light begins to soften now, not into another burden, but into a gentler kind of quiet. The prairie stretches wide around you, washed and breathing, while the wagon moves with that slow cradle of wood, leather, and patient animal strength. You do not need to think very hard anymore. The road has taken over the work of thought. Each turn of the wheel, each soft clink of chain, each distant call from the line ahead becomes part of a long, steady lull. The smells that cling to you begin to feel less harsh. Smoke softens in the cloth. Damp canvas warms into something almost familiar, almost comforting. The memory of rain drifts through it all like a cool trace fading from the air. Beneath you, or beside you, the movement stays constant and low, not fast, never fast, just enough to loosen the mind from its grip on every small discomfort. The sky above the prairie pales toward evening silver. Grass bends under the breeze in long and murmuring strokes. A bird crosses the open distance and disappears. Somewhere nearby, an ox breathes out slowly, and the sound seems to match your own. Around you, the whole train keeps its measured pace, no urgency, no suddenness, only the quiet agreement of many living things continuing together. Your eyes grow heavier with the rhythm of it. The day has spent what it asked from you. The campfire smoke, the rain scent, the wagon creaks, the soft earth and drying cloth all blend into one calm drifting impression. Nothing needs solving at this moment. Nothing needs lifting, scraping, tying, or rescuing from the weather. There is only the road, the cooling light, and the gentle roll westward through a vast and patient land. So you let the motion carry you. You let the sounds grow softer. You let the evening gather round the wagon train like a blanket laid carefully over tired shoulders. And in that long quiet, with the prairie dimming and the wheels still turning, you finally drift into rest.